So Mikko, thanks for joining us for this latest conversation in our photo editor series. It's great to have you with us. You're currently a photo editor on the international desk of the New York Times. Tell us a bit about your background and how you came into editing. And also, it's the international desk. Presumably that's different from domestic photo editing or domestic stories. Perhaps you can explain a little bit about that at the Times as well. But just give us a little bit of your biography on how you got to where you are now.
Sure. So I spent over a decade in the United Kingdom. I studied actually international relations first and politics, and through that I just developed this interest in photography, or like a hobby. But then one of my friends showed me, I've told this story before to many times, but I'll share it here again, is one of my friends showed me the documentary about James Nachtwey called War Photographer. And I was just amazed that, I mean, I hadn't really thought about or known about photojournalism as a profession, and I just realized that, wow, there was this thing called photojournalism that kind of combines the two of my interests at the time, like journalism, international affairs, and photography. And actually, after the international relations degree, I ended up doing another degree in Wales on photojournalism. And I just decided that was the path I wanted to go on. And after graduating, I worked a couple of years as a photographer in London, but I was also very passionately blogging about photojournalism on this site called Photojournalism Links, which kind of became known and popular in the industry. And then I had this kind of a peculiar jump from being a photographer and a blogger into being approached by Time.com in New York that they're looking for an associate photo editor, and would I be interested in applying? And I did, and I got a job as a photo editor at Time.com, and they had certain courage taking me on since I hadn't any previous formal experience, but I guess they had seen that I had certain eye and certainly a passion through the blogging. And I became a photo editor at Time.com. I was covering international news there from 2015 to end of 2012 to 2015. And then end of 2015, I got a job at the New York Times international desk. And after a short training period, I moved to the paper's former Asia headquarters in Hong Kong. And I served as the Asia photo editor for over 5 years in the Hong Kong bureau there. And Times has a big photo department. We have a lot of staff photographers, several dozens, and we have several dozen staff photo editors, but there's only 6 or 7 of international photo editors. There was 2 of us in Asia, and I was the digital photo editor, which meant that I assigned all our photography for the foreign desk throughout Asia, from Pakistan and Afghanistan all the way to Japan, and then from Mongolia all the way down to Australia and New Zealand. And it was a big region to cover, but very exciting job. And
yeah.
So what I think I missed the last part of your question. What was it?
No, that's fine. That's fine. Tell us a little bit about, I mean, how would you characterize your major responsibilities? I mean, what if you had to, bullet point your tasks and so on, how would you describe that?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. The main job is to really work with the text editors on the desk who are covering certain regions and identifying the stories that they are covering or the paper is covering. And then, when they come to me with stories that they are planning, I will then assign, trying to identify the stories that we will assign original photography for, and in the New York Times, we're fortunate that we can do it whenever we really want. So I would identify this is a story we will assign as original photography for, find a photographer, choose a photographer, send them on their way, and then come back to the process when the photographer assigns their images and then edit them for the online presentation. That's really the basic nuts and bolts of the job. Obviously, it's liaising with correspondents in the field who often reach out to me, like it could be a correspondent in Thailand and they're thinking of a story and they come to me like, do you think this could work? And it's not always just with the other editors, but it's actually with the reporters and correspondents in the field. And then it's receiving ideas and pitches from photographers and seeing if the desk is interested in those ideas that we could then originate from the photo department side.
Yeah. I mean, the New York Times is in many ways uniquely well resourced as a media organization. I mean, it's a huge global media organization now. It's operating 24 hours. I mean, this is kind of a big question, but from your perspective there, how would you characterize the state of the media industry now? Is it possible to generalize about some of the main things that are happening or some of the major challenges in the field?
Yeah. Well, I would, even when I think of Time.com and Time Magazine, where I worked before, I definitely saw that there's a big change in how they operated and assigned photography. And I feel that, I mean, we've all seen there's a disappearance of a lot of famous magazine titles and publications that still exist, assigning far less. And that is, I think it's just a sad fact that has happened in the industry. I think to some extent, New York Times is a bit of an exception that we are very fortunate that we're in a position where we can assign a lot, and we've actually, like, I think 5 years ago, we actually increased our day rate. I think we nearly doubled our day rate 5 years ago, whereas I think a lot of publications have their assigning less and the day rates are the same as what they used to be, 30, 40 years ago. So there's definitely concerning facts or situation in the industry overall, but I think personally, I'm fortunate to work at a time where we can still assign, and I feel we assign more than ever, really.
Yeah. Thinking also about some of the broader issues, I mean, in many ways, photography has had to some extent a little bit of a reckoning around some identity questions recently. Probably requires a bit more of a reckoning on these issues. I'm thinking of, in the wake of the Me Too scandals, the need for greater diversity in the profession. How do you think about these issues, and how do they influence your work as a photo editor?
Well, I certainly think that we, as editors, we need to use more local photographers around the world, and people from different backgrounds. And I think there needs to be more like a gender parity in terms of assigning. I think photojournalism has been quite white male dominated field for decades, and I think that needs to change. I think there's been certain improvements, but there's a long way to go. I certainly think that I'd like to try to think outside the box and not always just go to the same photographers that we've been going on. And I hope other people do the same. And luckily there are organizations like Women Photograph, and there's an African photojournalism database, and there's different resources and diversity photo where you can find new voices and photographers that are, maybe come from countries or communities or that are like less represented in the industry. Yeah.
Do you think those questions of representation are clearly essential in terms of, if society is made up in a particular way, then institutions should also, to a large extent, reflect that makeup? But how does it change kind of the stories that are covered, or the type of eye that people have, or sort of visual work that is produced? Do you think there's a direct connection between the identity of the photographer and the kind of work that's done?
I think I've heard people say at the times that we need to kind of look or more like also the communities, that the people who cover stories kind of need to be somehow look or have to be some sort of reflection also on the communities and people we cover. That I do think that when we have more diverse voices, we will also find the report will be richer from it, and I think people who come from certain communities, they see things that we don't, or they cover them, in new ways, and it's important to have that diversity. Sorry, and what was it?
No, just thinking about, I mean, I think it's absolutely essential to have that diversity. I think we would all agree on that. I'm just wondering about the link between the actual visual that's produced and the self-identification of the person making the image and the story, whether it's possible to say a person with this identity produces this kind of visual. Is that too crude? I suspect it is. So what's the relationship between someone's background and their position and the kind of story or the kind of visual work that's produced? I'm not sure any of us have an answer to this. It's something that I think about all of them.
I mean, I don't think that we always, we're in a position, or I don't think it should always be such a clear-cut case that, okay, this is a certain story that about a certain community that we would have to find a person from that community to cover it. But I do think that certainly, like, if we look at the abortion issues in the US or internationally, I think those are stories that really I feel like should be covered by women when possible. And when you have stories about certain issues or groups, and if you are able to kind of incorporate a professional who is somehow has a deeper connection to that group, I think it's going to have certain benefits, by the photographer being able to get more intimate with the subject and being able to do more in-depth work. But I don't subscribe to the idea that you would always have to force it, and I think in some cases it's in certain stories it's almost, it can be beneficial to have a foreigner go in and do the story. Also, it's sometimes safer. I mean, there's a lot of stories where having a local photographer do it or issue to cover it could be actually dangerous for them. So that's certainly a consideration that to keep in mind.
Yeah, and I think as in the case of literature and other forms, the view of the outsider and the stranger can sometimes be a distinct view itself. It's not the correct view, it's not the right view, it shouldn't be the only view, but a mix of these views I think would be good for that.
I mean, I would say that outsiders can see things that locals, I mean, I think if I think of my own life and own communities, it's like you can become blind to certain things, and then when others come from elsewhere, they see things differently, and they're almost like excited to point out certain things that you've kind of grown blind to. So there is certain benefits to that too.
Kind of exposing the taken for granted.
But obviously there's also the very big danger of like the exits just kind of like grabbing onto those exotic things, or things that are exotic to you, rather than that obviously aren't
absolutely
in themselves.
Another very broad question. I mean, what do you see as photographies or the role of visual images? What's the role of the visual in storytelling generally? What would you say is like the primary contribution of photography to storytelling? Is there something special about photography that is distinct from other modes of information?
I mean, I think photographs take readers to places and locations they cannot themselves visit far better and deeper than words ever can. You know, I think whether it's Ukraine or Afghanistan or Somalia, that you can write about people and places, but there's certain facts that photographs cannot share. But I think for pictures have the way to really connect the reader to the people and location depicted. And so I think photography does a very good job in creating like this emotional connection between the people who see the images and the people depicted in them. So I think that's like the biggest contribution from photography.
Yeah, cool. So I think it's probably a good time you were going to share a story or two with us and take us through some of the thinking behind how a particular story that you worked on in the Times was put together. So should we do that now?
Sure. So I'll just do share screen here.
Yep.
So I just actually picked just one story, but this is I thought it would be interesting to share a story that originates from a photographer's pitch. This is a story on drought and hunger crisis in Somalia, which was pitched to us by photographer Malin Fezehai. Spent good part of this year in different parts of Africa and actually did quite a lot of work for us. And she has, you know, a lot of experience working on the continent, and she has Ethiopian and Swedish heritage. But she came to me sometime in April pitching this idea that, you know, we had done like some short story about the drought in Somalia, and she felt like, you know, we should get in the ground there and do something, you know, do really ground reporting on people going through this famine, which is by some estimates worst in four decades. And obviously the war in Ukraine has raised global food prices, and there's now really this acute food crisis. And I discussed it with our Africa editor Laurie Goodstein, and she was into the idea, and we teamed up Malin with our East Africa correspondent Abdi Latif Dahir, who's based in Kenya, and they spent 2 weeks in Somalia in beginning of May. They were working on a couple of stories, of which the biggest one was this story on the drought and famine. You know, first I would just point out that it was really good thinking on Malin's part to, you know, to really think that, you know, there was, you know, this was already in the news, but how can we do, you know, good strong story of it? And I'm glad that we you know, the paper was willing to take it on. Obviously, like, Somalia is not a country where we go lightly, so, you know, there's certain security concerns. So you know, we Abdi and Malin were in constant contact with one of our security consultants, and they made a plan, like where they, in terms of how they travel, who's the driver, and they kept, you know, daily contact on making to make sure that they were, you know, safe doing the work that they did. They worked in Mogadishu, and then they also worked in Dolo in some of the IDP camps and health centers in the West. And in terms of like working on a story like this, what I often do is that you know, there was the initial pitching process, then this, you know, taking it on, and then I had a phone call or two with Malin of like, what are we trying to achieve with this story, and what you know, what are we, in terms of visuals, what are we trying to get? And then you know, Malin and Abdi really planned those logistics of where to go and how to go. But then I pretty much, while they were there, and this goes with other stories too, I pretty much let Malin to, do her job as she best see fit based on, those earlier conversations. So that it's not that what I don't like to do ever is create any kind of short lists of like, I want this and I want that and portrait. And, I think that kind of list just kind of like hinder creativity. And the photographer knows themselves best, what is possible in given the circumstances. Obviously, we want to assign only photographers who we know who can pull off the story. So, I mean, yes. Let's say if this idea had come from like maybe a younger photographer who doesn't have experience, in similar experience that Malin had, we might have felt like, okay, you have a great idea to go, but I'm not sure if you would be able to pull it off. Whereas I was confident that Malin could pull it off. So that's like the second part. But then, and then she does her work, and then when she comes back, then I kind of reinsert myself into the process, and there's usually a draft of the story, and then and I start kind of building this puzzle of what does the text say, and what are the photographs, and trying to obviously seek out in my mind the strongest photographs, but also make sure that we obviously that we cover those locations and people, some of the people that we've covered, so that there's definitely the photographs and text need to be matched. And I mean, in this case, obviously Malin and Abdi were traveling together, so in a way all the photographs and text and the reporting was from the same place. But it what I also don't think that is always necessary is that like text could mention certain specific people, and I don't feel like we necessarily need to always show that person if there's another photograph that kind of tells the same thing, and or in a stronger way visually, because I feel like photographs and ultimately photographs should enhance the overall, and not just illustrate like this person gets mentioned, this location gets mentioned. I mean, there's a whole section in the story from like a market in Dolo where I didn't use any photographs, but like for instance this woman Hirsio Muhammad, she's in the lead, and she has this really horrific story how she was left home with 3 of her children, 2 of which died on the way to the IDB camp, and then Malin and Abdi met her at the camp, and she was photographed with her 2.5-year-old daughter Mariam, and after she had already lost 2 of her children. So obviously, I mean, I think Malin's photograph of her is strong, but also it once it comes after the very strong lead of the story, describing what she went through, I think it's a really powerful thing. And then for this photograph of this young child Fatuma Yusuf in a Mogadishu malnutrition ward, we have a bigger, there's several paragraphs of her of the parent, but like I just thought there was this moment of tenderness is in this one image that we didn't need to show necessarily the parent and the child the face, but the simple gesture of the parent holding the child's feet was very strong. And in terms of the visual editing, I had discussed about doing some drone images with Malin beforehand, so she actually then found a guy who could rent her drone in Mogadishu, and so she took some drone imagery, and I just used this one photograph from the Dolo IDB camp. I think it's I think drones are very good at capturing scale, and this was exactly what I had in mind when I asked her to do it, that if we get this kind of an aerial from one of these IDB camps, that could be
yeah, I mean, it's a fantastic, in video terms, a fantastic sort of establishing shot for the whole scene and issue.
Yeah, and then obviously, but then I also I want to be mindful that I don't want to overuse it. It's usually most stories maybe it's quite often just one image, just kind of setting the scene and nothing more than that. And then there's this girl called Mariam Faisal, who it's kind of unusual for us to have this kind of a portrait in a story, that is, you have such a direct eye contact, and it's but I was just really struck by this image, and a lot of the editors who saw it were as well, and then I kind of included it as almost as a break in the middle of a story. It's like a vertical photograph, unlike all the other ones which are horizontal, and which we nearly always 99% of the photographs we run are pretty much horizontal, but like I think sometimes vertical images, and it can kind of add something different to it and to the mix, and obviously especially when it was like an unusual kind of portrait with the icons that I used, but like this is a story that came from the 2-week trip, and then which by time standard it's a kind of medium-sized enterprise. It's not a huge story, but it's definitely an important one. And then here it got one full page on a very widely read Sunday issue on June 12th, and so we had this kind of the same top image, and then I also wanted to show Hirsio again, but then there's also there's like one new image that I didn't have the online display of one mother feeding tube feeding milk to their child. And what often happens at the New York headquarters, we have a print hub, and a team of photo editors who actually then take most of our stories from online, and they edit them for the paper, but then with kind of enterprise stories that myself and some of my colleagues are very heavily invested in, we can also ask that, can I edit that for print? So this story I worked for over a couple of days.
Right. Are there different considerations for the sorts of images that work online versus the sorts that work in print?
Well, I mean, I guess the biggest consideration is the space that you might kind of have like a medium-sized story, and it was a very visual, but it maybe, and you could put a lot of images online, but we might not have the journalistic heft to actually get a very prominent a lot of space in print. So it's like a judgment call, like you might get 1, 2, or 3 photos, and what are those calls? What are those photographs that you use? So it's much tighter selection, and obviously there's a consideration. It's 2022, but a lot of our pages are still black and white.
Yes.
So
yes.
so if is the story going to be in a page that has color?
Right.
I mean, we often, for the biggest, like for Somalia story, you can request color, and which means that I have this story that really needs to be in color, and then they try to accommodate it, putting on a page that has it, but I think if you run these photographs in black and white, they would really lose a lot, especially the top one from the camp, where you have this striking red color in the clothing, and so that's one consideration. And then in print, you have to consider, if you don't get a full page, what is the other story or other 2 stories on the same page, and what are those images show? So you have to sometimes edit your image for that story based on what are the other stories on the page, or the facing page, or the wider section. Like if we have a soldiers shooting artillery in Ukraine on one international page, and then we have an image from some other war zone elsewhere, let's say Yemen, like would be, we don't want to do a similar type of image. So there's that kind of consideration, certainly, that on online we approach every story individually, in the sense that we don't have to worry about what other stories in the section have.
It's a self-contained unit.
Exactly, self-containing, whereas in print you have to kind of consider the other stories and the space you get, and the color, and so on. So
interesting.
And size. So obviously, you might get one image, but if it's going to be big, do you get 6 columns or just 2 columns? So It's nice to work in print. It's a different
yeah.
animal in a way.
You were talking about drone footage there, and that's kind of sort of new technology. I've got a question from Aki in the audience, and a reminder to others, if you want to ask some questions, drop them into the Q&A box. We'll bring them in or come to them at the end. But in this question, he says, the New York Times is quite innovative in using both visual imagery, data visualization, graphics, multiple media, video, etc. in its online stories. Can you talk of any new form of visual storing technology that really excites you?
Good question.
Well, I'm a kind of a traditionalist. I mean, I think a couple of years ago or several years ago now, everybody was getting into video, and even more photographers started experimenting with video, and some even moved completely to video. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I continue to, you know, just passionately love still photography and advocate for that. And I'm quite happy just putting still photographs in a story online and do like and keep doing that. But I guess there's, you know, what we've done from, you know, drone is, I think, is a great innovation, and it adds a lot, like I said, and especially capturing scale. And what we've done in places like Ukraine, where like David Guttenfelder was an assignment, and he was like flying over the drone with the drone, like also like a video of you know, of a clip of flying over a destroyed area can show more than just a still from that same place. Yes. So that's interesting. But in terms of like photography and video, beyond photography and video, I mean, there's different ways of displaying stories that we've done. We've, for instance, experimented with so-called tap stories, which is, you know, rather than scroll down a story, we've done, we do like a story that basically just follows complete narrative with images and then very minimal text, and then they kind of especially work well, and they design for the phone. So you have your phone screen, and then you tap and move to the same next image, and there's a bit of text. And
were those popular? Because I really love them, but you don't see them that much.
There's certain production involved with those that so when we first tried them maybe 4 or 5 years ago, we did quite a few, but we haven't done a ton of them. I could actually, you know, pull one here that we did earlier this year from Afghanistan. This was by David Guttenfelder. So let me go to screen share here. I'm improvising, so this could go horribly wrong. If we have time, I'll just quickly show one, since we're talking about information.
I like improvising. This is perfect.
So this is, you know, it's a story that this is obviously the desktop view, but on mobile, these images were cropped vertical to maximize the phone screen, which obviously I felt horrific. I was like going to David Guttenfelder, I'm so sorry, but we're thinking this story from like, I'm going to crop your great landscape into vertical, and which, you know, and obviously affected also what images you could choose, because they wouldn't all crop well, and you know, you couldn't always use the exact image that you wanted to. But like, actually, we, you know, I think David was very happy how it ran. I mean, and you know, on if you see the story on desktop, you still see, you know, the full glory of his compositions. But this is a very different storytelling, in the sense that this was a road trip that David Guttenfelder did with our Kabul bureau chief, Thomas Gibbons-Neff, and one of our bureau reporters from Kabul to Kandahar, and basically it was a story about the highway between those two cities, and it was very much a narrative that followed their trip from Kabul to Kandahar. So literally the photographs and the text go hand in hand, telling this narrative of this road trip. And
quite a few of images where I really can't see how you would ever.
You have to go and see it on the phone. It was a bit, you know, challenging at times. And obviously then you have to still plan that when you crop it vertical, you know, where does the text go? So
beautiful images.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know whether those tap stories attract a different audience to other stories because of the fact the way they're made for a smartphone.
Yeah. Am I still on screen share or no?
No.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I don't know the data on that, but I know that it was, you know, it was pretty popular, and I mean, I know that Times is also very active on Instagram and you know, doing Instagram stories. We have a whole team of photo editors just planning those, and I think that big part of that is trying to capture audience that wouldn't traditionally, they wouldn't, you know, go and get their inky fingers by reading the actual print newspaper, which I still love, but like I think a lot of people get their news online and also from Instagram and other social media platforms. But you know, even with this tap story, that, you know, it was definitely like made for the phone screen, we still made a big 2-page spread out of it in the newspaper. We just, you know, laid out the images and we just kind of organized the text differently. But like one story can have different versions of itself for the phone screen and the desktop and print. And then, you know, I'm sure we probably did like an Instagram story out of it as well. So
yeah. Ilvy, over to you.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask you some, well, there are a lot of viewers today, and I'm pretty sure many of them are photographers. And I know they like some practical advice from you. So I followed your blog kind of back in the day, and then you went to Time. So I kind of know the stories that you're drawn to, but they are quite broad, seems like many of the stories you're interested in are from different parts of the world. So just for the photographers watching, what kind of stories do you generally like to kind of work on, or that you like to see coming in from photographers? I know you're now in a region, of course, as well.
So yeah, I mean, I handle Afghanistan, Pakistan, and Africa, the entire continent of Africa for the foreign desk. So those are the kind of regions that I assign, and I have colleagues who handle the Americas, like and outside the US, and then colleagues who handle now Asia and Europe. So, but I obviously especially want to hear from photographers who have, you know, pitches and ideas related to Afghanistan, Pakistan, and anywhere in Africa, because those are stories that I would then, you know, get to work with. Obviously, if you have ideas from elsewhere, I'm happy to receive them, and I'll pass those to my colleagues. But I love hearing ideas that are kind of like off the news. Either they're ideas that are taking a new angle on a story in the news, or something that I've never heard of or known about, and a community or a place that is somewhere out in the world, and that there's this like a fascinating visual story to be told. For instance, like Hannah Reyes Morales from a great Philippines-based photographer, had this pitch last fall about this community in the Philippines where people were hand feeding whale sharks, but due to the pandemic, and the tourists have gone away, but they still kept feeding the whale sharks, and you know, with the hope that, you know, the tourists will one day return, and, you know, the community would benefit. And you know, I'd never heard of this place or the practice, and Hannah suggested going there for like a couple of days and do a story out of it. And I discussed it with the Asia editor who was handling Philippines, and we took it on board. And then it was just, you know, it was just like 4-day trip, and Hannah wrote the story as well, and she had this one incredible image of taking like partially underwater, partially over water, that you would see this massive whale shark below and the fishermen above the water, and we ran it on top of the, you know, New York Times front page. And it really was an idea that came from her execution, and she even wrote it, and really, I think, introduced to, you know, a lot of readers to a place they hadn't ever known about or would ever even go to. And I mean, and the visuals were just striking, because I one of the masthead editors, you know, saw the front page before it was released to the public, and she asked, like, do we have a photo illustration top of the front page, because it was so unbelievable image. And I wrote to her that no, it's a photograph. And so this is a perfect example of just like story that is not in the news. There's a tiny peg to, you know, pandemic, a certain peg to the pandemic, but it was really great idea, great execution, and all of it, it wasn't even financially a big effort because she really pulled it off in a matter of a couple of days, which was just extraordinary. Although I'm always eager to, you know, open to discussing giving photographers more time if it feels like the, you know, the stories will benefit from it.
Yeah.
And would you ever work with photographers you've never worked with? Like,
absolutely. I mean, most of the time, new photographers reach out to me, and I might, if I like their work, I might try them on a small one-day assignment first, and if it goes well, then we might kind of try something longer with a couple of days, and then if it keeps going well, they, you know, they can get those bigger 1-2 week or longer assignments, and there's a lot of photographers I gave their first assignments at the New York Times, and they become regulars. You know, Matt Abbott from Australia, you might have heard him.
yeah,
I think I had him shoot some portrait, which I didn't even first think, you know, didn't go particularly well, but I was like, I've seen this guy's stuff, it's good. And you know, and then he became a regular, and we went on to do this really tremendous work on the fires in Australia, and won a World Press photo, and now he did his first story for Nat Geo, and also won a World Press photo for the story. So,
and just to say, we had a 7 Insider event with Matt and another member of the Oculi Collective in Australia back in February, and he showed that Aboriginal work before it won those awards. So,
amazing work. Yeah, it's really, it's very well deserved that he won World Press with it, for sure. So
raised hand from John.
People raising hands. Let me see.
Well, we've
got
some questions that you can go through, Ilvy, and if people are raising hands, instead of raising a hand, drop a question in the Q&A box.
That's the best. Let me see. Are you also seeing them, Mikko? I'll read them out loud. So, good question from Gavin Doran. During initial outreach from a photographer pitching a story, do you prefer a lot of information and research to show due diligence, or just enough information to get the point across? What are some common mistakes that photographers make in terms of conveying their story idea?
Well, I'm my favorite way of receiving pitches is just by email, and I kind of, it's so busy. Everyone is so busy that I'm quite happy to get just a few paragraphs explaining the idea. And but how Times is different to a lot of other publications is that I think a lot of publications are looking to license work that photographers have already shot. So you shoot something with your own, you know, expense, and then you sell it, and we might, you know, hoping that the publication would license it. But what we usually want to do is that we want to receive ideas, and then take on the, like in Hannah's case, we took on the ideas, and then we assigned her to do the work for us, and that's our primary method of working. And I mean, there's exceptions that sometimes somebody comes with an unpublished work that we license, and then we might assign them to do a bit more work. But for the, you know, I think 99% of the time it's always us assigning original work. So we can be approached already in the ideas phase, but it can just be a couple of paragraphs of like, what do you think is a story? You know, why do you think we would be interested in it? How long would you need minimum to do the work? And what are the kind of major expenses involved that I should be aware about? And what is the access? Like, are you telling me an idea that, you know, you have access to something really exclusive, but then when we, you know, you actually, are you like pitching to do something that you don't really have any kind of access yet? So it's good to know that, especially if, I mean, obviously if it's something like that could be difficult to get permission to do.
So this would be like just in an email, because I know people want to probably know, do they need to send a PDF, or do they want to?
I find it just email is fine, and I think like even our security, like IT security, probably doesn't like getting us like opening all sorts of Google Drives and you know, downloading WeTransfer. So it's you know, it could just be like email and with a couple of images attached. And I mean, and I'm not opposed to the occasional PDF, but like nothing like, you know, I wouldn't like send WeTransfers or some, you know, massive terabytes.
Yeah.
Google Drive, with terabytes of information.
Yeah, so just an email with all the information they need. There's another question from Eva. I haven't read it yet, so let's see. I noticed the New York Times also uses Getty Images. How can we stand out to the New York Times as a stock platform? And what is it like to pitch an entire stock platform versus a collection of visuals to a photo editor? We photograph animal industries and offer these images on our stock platform.
Yeah, just
the Animals Media.
Yeah, we add some context. We also had a 7 Insider event with Joanne MacArthur last August from We Animals Media about animal photojournalism.
Yeah.
So I think Eva is asking about they're involved in this particular niche, extremely important niche.
Yeah.
Is that something that you would go to, or
I would
want to see a pitch about those sorts of ideas?
Well, I would think that, especially like climate and science desk, I could imagine that they might have, or travel desks might have used for that kind of content more than maybe the international. But I would say that we have, even though I've been talking about, a lot of assigning and original photography, we do, we have logins to all the major, news agencies and subscriptions to Getty, Reuters, AP, EPA, and we, use a lot of the images. But obviously then we also, when we sometimes have stories that we can't find the suitable images from them, we go to like these smaller ones. And I certainly, if there's a, an agency like that has really great like animal imagery that is not easily available elsewhere, they should reach out to the New York Times photo desk and see if we could create if there's interest from our managers to have like a New York Times logins, and also then agree on a fee that we would pay to use those on our stories. But certainly I know that like I have colleagues in the culture and arts desk that use like a lot of these agencies that I never have to go to, like that have all these like legendary film stills from all these classic movies, or like celebrity portraits and stuff like that, and so we use dozens and dozens of news agencies and other photo archives to to source images from, and I'm sure there's also a need for animals and other types of
related types of stories. Okay, thank you. And I'm pretty sure that when you work for the New York Times, you probably don't have to look very far for new photographers, because I'm guessing they are sending you emails a lot and you get pitches a lot. But are there other ways, like maybe photo festivals or Instagram pages, where you kind of try to find new talent, or does it really just kind of come to you in your inbox?
Well, I do get a lot of emails, and I've kind of made my mission to go through them and always respond to everybody. It sometimes takes weeks, or sometimes it can take months if it gets lost somewhere in the shuffle. But I always go through them. I try to reply to everyone, and I've definitely found some really good photographers through that. But also, I try to kind of keep an eye on what other publications use, but also wires. There's a lot of really great photographers out there who kind of had their start in the wires, and I think I think wires often get a bad rep. There's tremendously good photographers there, but also there's people who especially just starting out, and I've noticed a lot of good talent that have been shooting for AFP and or Getty, and so I'm always kind of keeping an eye on that, and there's some of them I assign, and they become regulars for us, so that's important. But also, I mentioned Women Photograph. I think is a really tremendous source, and there are a lot of other similar types of web platforms as well. But I would say, like, I do sometimes when I hear about photographers, I check their Instagram, but I still think that you should have a group, professional website, or some sort of website where your images are shown. It doesn't have to be a professional. It could be a free WordPress blog platform where you put your best images, and you don't even have to pay the $20 to your domain name. It could be your name at wordpress.com, but put your best photos there, and phone number and email, and that, you know, you it's a chance for you to be seen. I don't think Instagram alone is enough. I know that there's, you know, there's people who don't like to put in their emails or phone numbers on their website because maybe there's, you're open to harassment. But I don't know. I find it kind of difficult sometimes when I find a photographer and then there's no like email address or phone number,
contact details.
Like, there's a contact form, and then you just have to kind of hope that hopefully it's, you know, they'll read it and you know, and you hear from them. But like sometimes with, you know, it's we're in such a hurry that it's like the best. I just like finding people's phone number and call them on WhatsApp or whatever and reach out and you know,
actually I've even heard from editors who say that you'll have a beautiful website and then people don't have any no contact form.
I mean,
like, okay.
I find it a bit baffling. So I was like, I have to be able to, you know, you could have the best work, but then if there's no way of me to contact you, and you know, I've also tried to make myself like available by, you know, I've had my email address on my, you know, on my social media platform so that people can easily find me. So I think editors can do their part as well, that you know, that that we can be, I know that, you know, if you're just starting out and then you're like, oh, you might, you know, who's the editor there, and you know, and then you might find out who the editor is, but you don't have any way of reaching out to them. So I think editors can do a better job of being available, because ultimately we all benefit from that.
Of course, from being able to contact each other. And well, this kind of naturally brings us to the question, do's and don'ts. This was a big don't have a contact form, or but there must be different do's and don'ts, I guess, for photographers who are reaching out to you, or in any editor, maybe in general. What would you say are big?
In terms of contacting editors, I think like a cold call is kind of feels a bit too direct way of contacting. You know, like it's just like getting a call from somebody I've never heard of, and I might be in a meeting or doing something under deadline to, you know, getting something finished and getting it out in the world, and then somebody calls me that I've never heard of. They probably I wouldn't have the, you know, probably a lot of patience to chat at that moment, and that probably wouldn't be the first impression the photographer would want to leave. But I would say that for people starting out, I would think on a bigger level of the do's and don'ts is that you know, I think there's like a lot of contests and competitions in our industry. Forget about those. Try to be the photographer that you should be in a ways that there's a lot of fads and styles in terms of toning or subject matter that people cover. You know, like whether it's everybody doing stories about coal mining or everybody doing stories about this and that, and toning in a certain way. Like do the kind of work you really feel is important, and cover it in a way that you would like it to be covered, and rather than trying to mimic somebody. I think that's a big like a do. And then also don't like ignore the financial aspect of the job, because because of the industry is going through this kind of difficult time in many levels. I find that there's been a lot of people who have dropped out of the industry because they cannot make it work financially. So make sure that you have a side hustle, whether it's in photography or something else, that you can, you know, keep doing photography, and you don't try to struggle too long and drop out completely, because it's really sad to see that, you know, I keep thinking certain names that I used to come up, like really, you know, some photographers who, you know, were winning awards, emerging photographer this, emerging photographer that, but then like in a couple of years they're gone because, I don't know, they probably, you know, got married, want to start a family, and they realize, how can I ever have those things that normal like people have, you know, when I can't even pay my rent, and so it's like thinking also beyond the photography to make sure that it works, you know, you have it going, you know, in a financially stable way, as stable as you can, because you know, it's always a struggle, but you know,
Yeah, that's a really good advice, actually, because you're right. Not that many years ago, let's say 10 years ago at World Press, so many people won, and some of these names are totally off the, I don't even know where they are now.
Yeah,
you're right.
And it really sad to see that.
Yeah, you're right.
Just thinking about stories that people cover, there's a question from Georgina in the audience. She wants to ask, do you think it's better to specialize in a topic as a photojournalist or to cover everything? And there are also mid positions between specializing and covering everything too. But should people have something, a repertoire that they're known for, or should they be available for all types of stories?
I guess there's two schools of it. I mean, I think if I think of my colleagues here in New York, I mean, there's a lot of photographers who just kind of pick up whatever stories they do, and they do it very well, and they don't have a particular speciality. But like in terms of like international, we've kind of we found that I found that there's a lot of people who have, like, you know, either you're in certain the location is your speciality, kind of, that you have expertise on a certain country or region, and then you kind of like, it's good that I know that you really know how to work in that country or that region, and then you kind of do more work there. That it's good to be kind of based somewhere, or like keep going to a certain region where you would kind of like to be considered for work. I mean, like if you know you've done tons of work in just like in all over Europe, and then you suddenly come to me with a pitch from like Afghanistan. I mean, like, if I might not look at it as seriously as if you're somebody who's actually has a track record of doing work in Afghanistan. And so that's, I think, that's a big thing, like having I mean, there's a lot of people who don't, I mean, I think especially now with the way Afghanistan has changed due to the Taliban takeover, I think there's a lot of people who have even been based there. They are now moving out, but they will probably, I would imagine, a lot of these people will kind of keep doing Afghanistan stories because they're still passionate about the country. It's just too difficult to live there, but they will, and I would imagine still like a lot of publication will keep sending them there to cover the country. And so that's a big specialty. I mean, obviously there's different, I'm talking about, like, you know, my small world of like the foreign desk and photojournalism, but there's obviously, you know, the sports photography is a whole different world, and you know, portraiture and so on. But in terms of photojournalism, and if we talk about like New York Times foreign desk, I think it's good to kind of be known as a kind of attached to a certain region, almost a country, and then it's certainly, I think, if you do strong personal work on one certain topic or certain topics, I think, you know, you're certainly, I think, more considered than to take on bigger projects that we might have related to those topics, rather than just some jack of all trades who can, you know, probably can do a good job, but like we think that, okay, somebody's done good work on certain
on the subject,
they can subject matter, then they can, you know, they could probably be really good. They could do that good work for us too.
I know we're kind of nearing the end time, almost, but I see Maggie has a really lovely question as well. Maggie Stieber. I'm quite interested in this answer, actually, myself, but this has happened before to me as well. If someone, let's say myself or another photographer,
asking for a friend,
exactly, had been working on a project for a long time, and part of it was published in another publication, but there is still a lot of fresh work that was not published on a major crisis subject. Would you be interested in seeing new work on that same subject, especially if it's an ongoing crisis?
Absolutely. There's a saying that I've heard some old school New York Times editors say, who, like, it's not covered until the New York Times covers it. And I mean, it's a kind of really egoistic thing to say, but I'm saying it here because it makes a point that you know, if there's a big story in the world to be told, just because somebody else told it, we have to tell it as well. I mean, we're supposedly the paper of record. We have to cover it ourselves too. I mean, I think if photographer A covered it for Washington Post, we probably like last week, I don't know how would we just put the same photographer on it for us the following week, but like I certainly we we want to cover we have to cover the biggest stories, and also just because you work for a competitor, it doesn't mean that you couldn't work for us. So we really, I think there's been certain reputation that we, if you work for the Washington Post, you couldn't work for the New York Times or other publication, but that's certainly not true. Certainly not true anymore. That we want to work with the best people, and if they work for other publication, that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And we owe it to our readers to cover the biggest stories. So
yeah, cool.
But obviously it means that if somebody does this very exclusive angle or story or a certain person, we cannot be seen imitating. I mean, that would be yes. like stealing. We don't. Yes. It's like what I often say to photographers, like if they, if you have ideas, just send them to me, and if we feel that we want to do it, you can be certain that you will be the one doing it. I'm not in the business of stealing people's ideas. I mean, everybody would know it anyway, and it would be really bad reputation that photographer A pitched his idea to Mikko last week, and then he put on a photographer B on it. I mean, this can't happen. So your ideas are safe with us, and obviously if we don't pursue them, you can hopefully get somebody else interested.
No, go ahead. Sorry, Mikko.
I always try to be open to people's ideas because I want them to come to me, because it goes to also to the point of replying to people's emails, because you send me a great idea and I don't get back to you. I mean, and then you send me another time and I still don't get back to you. It might be that some photographers wouldn't approach me for the third time, and then they have some really incredible idea, and then they go to another publication, and then they will do it and they create amazing work, and then I'm like, why didn't you come to me? Well, because you didn't reply to me. So I think really is what part of my modus operandi to be kind of approachable and available, and at least consider people's ideas. And I saw that once they have the jackpot idea, that I'm the first or one of the first to get it, at least to get it in front of my eyes.
I think that's beautiful, because it's quite rare. I think there are many editors who don't respond, or I know it myself from some experiences, although I think ever since I joined 7, that has changed a lot as well. But I know it from teaching a lot of the students, and many of them are at quite a high level and working in the field a lot and working for good publications, and they always say, I never get a reply. What should I change? And I'm like, I don't know. Email. Next time I'll tell them, email Mikko, you'll get a reply.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I won't.
My email is mikko.takkunen@nytimes.com.
Thank you. That's lovely for sharing. And thanks for.
And it's on your social media profiles.
Yeah. Also. Thank you, Mikko.
Yeah, so this has been a great conversation, Mikko. Just one question to finish, which I think is interesting, because we all read photojournalism links back in the day. I mean, what do you think about photojournalism blogging or photography blogging now? Are there sites that you read? Are there people who you're paying attention to? It seems a lot less active, I would say.
I don't really, there's not really like blogs that I've been going to. I mean, I think it's more like seeing what people share on Twitter or what people are sharing on Facebook. Or what I really love is when photographers kind of share appreciation to their colleagues' work in Instagram stories.
Yeah.
Like it just could be like photographer just like sharing a still from a colleague that made a really credible frame somewhere, and then I'm like, I'm gonna go and check it out. So I often find good work like that, or come across pictures that way, rather than like going to blogs. Or I mean, sadly, like New York Times, we had the Lens blog, but that's been on hiatus for a couple of years now, and I'm not sure if it's coming back. But
maybe we need to bring photojournalism links back again.
Yes, Yes, Mikko.
The thought exhausts him already.
Yeah, I'm gonna get nightmares just thinking about it.
Maybe we'll have to do it on an Insider as well. I mean, we, obviously 7 Insider has a blog and we're trying to run article length pieces, analytical pieces, because I think there's a need for that. It's not easy to find writers. People in the audience who are interested in writing, pay attention to that. You can also pitch me for articles. We're interested in that. But yeah, that regular, ongoing, daily, weekly blogging about what stories are out there is not there so often, I think.
Yeah,
but it was very popular. I mean,
Yeah.
I love reading the Lens blog and yours, and there were many more actually a few years ago. But it seemed like
it was a period. Yes.
Yeah.
Anyway,
there's a niche for somebody to start.
A niche for somebody. Yes.
Definitely.
If someone wants to start it, get in touch with me. We can provide a platform for it. So.
Well done, David.
Yeah.
Great.
So great conversation. Great to have you, Mikko. I know the audience is saying lots of thanks. Really appreciated it. We'll put this up online for people to watch again.
Thanks for having me.
To see. And we hope to see you in person soon.
Yeah. Have a good summer, everybody. Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.